The cold wind of King's Landing had never felt right to Eddard Stark. Even in early spring, the southern air lacked the bite of Winterfell's chill, a sharpness that kept the mind alert and the spirit grounded. Here, the heat mingled with deceit. The court was a viper's nest, and he had stepped right into it, trusting honor in a place where honor was just a word tossed around like a joke. But on the day of his execution, something changed. It wasn't mercy, not from Joffrey Baratheon. The boy king had no heart, only hunger for power and cruelty. No, it was a plan, a secret, a deal forged in the shadows. Varys had moved quietly, whispering to the right ears. Sansa had begged, pleaded, and Cersei for once saw sense. Executing Ned Stark would turn the North into fire and fury. The Lannisters needed time, not rebellion. So a choice was made. Instead of a sword swift justice, Ned was sent to the wall, or so they told the people. What truly happened was far more hidden. Under the cover of night, escorted by gold cloaks loyal to gold more than to the crown, Ned was taken from the dungeons and placed aboard a small ship. His execution had been faked, a double, one of Varys's plays, his face hidden beneath. The executioner's cloth. Heads fell every day. Who would question it? By the time the bells tolled and the crowds mourned or cheered, the real Lord Eddard Stark was halfway down the Blackwater rush, his hair cut short, his beard grown rough, and his face shadowed by shame and survival. He should have died. That was justice, that was honor. But for once Eddard Stark chose his daughters over the sword. He remembered the quiet conversation with Varys in the dungeon. "You can die a hero, my lord," the spider had said, his voice like silk over steel. "Or live long enough to protect your blood. The realm will believe you dead either way. Choose wisely." Ned had made his choice. Now, he sat in a dimly lit room in a smuggler's hold, the creaking of the riverboat matching the weight of guilt in his chest. He had failed Robert, failed Jon Arryn, failed the realm, but he would not fail his daughters. Far north, Robb Stark was crowned king in the north. The banners of the direwolf flew once again. Men cried out vengeance for their father, and none knew the man they mourned was still breathing. It was safer this way. If word reached the Red Keep that Eddard Stark lived, the Lannisters would send blades and fire to finish the job. But not all secrets stayed buried. In the free cities, whispers began. A Westerosi noble hiding in Pentos, a man with northern eyes and the weight of a kingdom in his silence. Illyrio Mopatis greeted him with oily smiles and heavy robes. "An old friend of Varys is a friend of mine," he said. "You are welcome here, for now." But Ned had no interest in politics. All he wanted was to watch over his daughters, to send ravens where he could, gold where needed, to help them escape the claws of the Lannisters. Still, the world was shifting. Robb Stark was at war. Renly Baratheon had claimed the crown. Stannis marched with fire and smoke. And across the narrow sea, a young Targaryen girl gathered dragons from ash. Ned heard the names: Daenerys, Robb, Tywin. He felt the tremors beneath the surface. The storm was coming. And then came the letter. Folded once, marked with the sigil of House Stark, the direwolf pressed in wax. The writing was Robb's, short, direct. "Father, if by some chance this reaches you, we ride on Harrenhal. Tywin retreats. I do this for you, for Winterfell. If you live, let me know. You are missed." He read the letter over and over. "Alive," Robb said. "If you live." Eddard gripped the parchment with shaking hands. He had stayed hidden long enough. Maybe it was time the wolf returned. The sun hung low over the rooftops of Pentos, casting orange streaks across the cobbled streets and broken towers. Eddard Stark stood at the edge of a terrace overlooking the narrow alleyways, the letter from Robb clenched tightly in his hand. It felt heavier than any sword he'd held. His son, his boy, was leading men into battle, alone. thinking his father was dust beneath the sept of Baelor. He wanted to leave that very moment, ride to White Harbor, sail across the sea, march beside Robb under the Stark banner. But he was no longer the man who rode south with Robert Baratheon. His body had weakened from imprisonment. His wounds had barely healed. And worse, he had no name here, no friends, no sword. Illyrio watched him from the shadows, folding his hands over his silk-covered belly. You cannot go charging back into Westeros like some forgotten knight in a song. You are thought dead, and that is your greatest weapon now. Ned turned, his eyes colder than the breeze off the narrow sea. He is my son. I will not sit idle while he dies for my ghost. Illyrio smiled faintly. And yet, if you return too soon, the ghost becomes a target. The Lannisters will not hesitate to kill you again, for real this time. Then I'll go quietly. I'll find a way to the north. No banners, no noise, just me. The merchant lord sighed and poured himself a goblet of sweet summer wine. Even if you survive the journey, what will you return to? The north is at war. The crown would hang you twice if they found out. And if the boy loses, Ned's jaw clenched. He won't. He left that night, disguised once more, wearing the cloak of a common sellsword. No sigils, no honor, just quiet steps and an aching heart. As he sailed toward Braavos, the sea reminded him of days long past, of rowing with Benjen on the lakes of Winterfell, of watching Catelyn braid Sansa's hair near the weirwood tree, of holding Jon when he was just a crying infant, tucked in the snow-worn halls of the crypts. Gods, he missed them all. But not all memories brought comfort. He still remembered the last time he saw Arya, wild, defiant, sword in hand, tears in her eyes. She was missing now, vanished after his arrest. Rumors said a black-haired girl had been spotted near the docks, smuggled away by the Night's Watch recruiter. Could it have been Yoren? Could she still be alive? He had no answers, just hope, and that was a brittle thing in Westeros. By the time Ned reached the free city of Braavos, news had travelled fast. Renly Baratheon was dead. Stannis had taken Storm's End. King's Landing was under siege. The War of Five Kings had begun, and the land was burning in every corner. And the north. Robb had won at Oxcross. Jaime Lannister was a prisoner. Riverrun stood strong under the Tullys. Pride swelled in Ned's chest, but it was quickly crushed by fear. Victory meant nothing if the enemy changed tactics. Tywin Lannister was no fool. He wouldn't sit idle. In a quiet tavern near the moon pool, a cloaked man approached Ned's table, slid a knife from his belt and set it on the wood with care. "You're a hard man to find, Lord Stark." Ned didn't flinch. "You have me at a disadvantage." The man pulled back his hood, dark eyes, shaven head, Varys' whisper in human form. "Black Walder Frey sends his regards," the man said with a cold grin. Before Ned could move, the knife was gone, and the man vanished into the night. It was a message, a threat, a warning. The Freys had allied with the Lannisters. Somehow they knew. Ned Stark was no longer safe in Essos. He would have to go home, not in secret, but in fire and blood. He slipped out of Braavos before dawn, disguised again, this time heading for the coast, aiming to reach the narrow sea's busiest lane, the merchant route to White Harbor. He needed allies, a ship loyal to the north, and men who still remembered the name Stark with honor. But even as the seas grew wilder and the storms rolled across the horizon, a deeper storm brewed behind his back, one not of water, but betrayal. The Red Wedding had not yet happened, but the blood was already in the air. The ship that carried Ned Stark toward White Harbor was no sleek merchant galley or warship of the line. It was a battered fishing vessel, patched with old canvas, and manned by two brothers who trusted silver more than questions. They never asked who he was. They only knew he paid in coin, stamped with Robert Baratheon's crowned stag, and that he spent every night staring off toward the western horizon, toward Westeros. When they reached the fog-choked harbour, the docks were quieter than expected. War had emptied the city of much of its usual bustle. Sailors whispered rumours like prayers, of Lannister gold buying traitors, of Bolton dogs sniffing out northern loyalty, of Freys amassing swords near the Twins. Ned cloaked himself in the furs of a northern trader and walked among the city folk like a ghost in the mists. The walls of White Harbour still bore the sigil of House Manderley, but even their banners looked worn. He needed allies, and fast. He waited until nightfall before making his way to the Merman's Court, slipping through side alleys and forgotten gates. Sir Wyman Manderley sat like a mountain of flesh atop his stone chair, his jowls trembling with surprise as Ned Stark stepped from the shadows. "Gods," Wyman whispered, half rising. "You're supposed to be dead," Ned said. "I know." Wyman's eyes narrowed. "If word spreads you're alive, we'll have Lannister assassins in the sewers by dawn." "I'm not here to declare myself," Ned said. "Only to speak to my son." Wyman hesitated. "Robb is deep in the Riverlands. He rides with the Blackfish and the Great John. The Freys, they've invited him to a wedding, one of Lord Walder's daughters." Ned's blood turned to ice. "A wedding?" Wyman nodded slowly, unease flickering in his eyes. "Yes, to strengthen the alliance." "No Frey offers something for nothing," Ned muttered. "This stinks of treachery." "There are whispers," Wyman admitted, "but no proof." Ned stood silent for a long moment. "Send word. Tell Robb not to attend. Lie if you must. Invent an illness, a threat, anything. But he cannot go. And if he doesn't, we risk turning the Freys into open enemies." Ned leaned forward. "Better open enemies than a dagger in the dark." Wyman Manderley nodded. "I will send a raven tonight, but if you truly wish to save your son, you must ride." Ned left White Harbour before dawn, with 4 Manderley men-at-arms and a cold wind at his back. He wore no Stark colours. He travelled as Sir Brandon Snow, a wandering hedge knight, silent and grim. The road south was treacherous, bandits haunted. The passes, wolves prowled the trees, and the banners of the Boltons were seen far too often. At a crossroads inn near the Neck, he finally caught wind of his son. Robb had marched toward the Twins. The wedding was already underway. And Walder. Frey's gates had opened too easily. Ned's heart pounded as he rode harder, refusing to sleep, refusing to stop. He saw smoke in the distance, not columns, but thin trails, too light for campfires, too dark for hearths. Then the bodies began to appear. At first, just one. Northern Scout, throat slit, armor stripped. Then 2 more hanging from trees, their faces frozen in betrayal. Then came the horses, dead, bloated, scattered in the grass. And finally, the sound. Not battle, not war. Screams. Ned dismounted, running the last half-mile, his knees burning, his lungs tight. The Twins rose before him like twin towers of cruelty. The banners still hung from the ramparts, House Frey, and beneath it, the crimson, Lion of Lannister. The ground around the castle was soaked in blood. He saw northern soldiers being dragged from carts and flung into ditches. He saw Grey Wind's head, his son's direwolf, nailed to a pike. And then he saw the body. Robb Stark, propped on a horse, lifeless, sword snapped at the hilt, his crown gone. Ned fell to his knees, everything in him shattered. He had crossed the sea, braved the shadows, risked exposure. He had come back from the dead, only to bury his son. The red wedding had come and gone, and he was too late. But even as grief crushed him, something cold and ancient stirred inside Lord Eddard Stark. Not just sadness, not just guilt. Vengeance. The North remembered. Those words had always been spoken like a prayer, whispered in loyalty, etched into banners, carried in blood. But for Eddard Stark, kneeling in the mud beside the lifeless body of his son, they no longer sounded like honor. They sounded like a curse. The campfires had long since died. The Freys had burned the corpses in piles. What remained were ashes, bones, and the stench of betrayal. A few northern survivors, scattered and wounded, fled into the woods. Ned found one. A boy, no older than Bran, trembling beneath a ruined wagon, an arrow through his thigh. Who led the betrayal? Ned asked him, voice flat, void of warmth. The boy swallowed hard. It was them, Freys, Boltons, and Lannisters. Sir Blackwalder struck first, then the rest. They didn't even wait for the bedding ceremony to end. He began sobbing, and Ned left him there, wrapping Rob's cloak around what was left of his body. No priests, no pyres, just a father with a dagger, cutting away the flesh of war to leave only truth behind. He couldn't return to White Harbor. That would only bring more knives, so he turned toward the Wolfswood, where old loyalties still ran deep. Every mile south risked recognition, and every hour that passed felt like another life lost. But the Boltons had grown bold in the north. Ned learned of it at a village near Baratheon. A broken woman screamed as Bolton men dragged her husband through the snow, accusing him of hiding wolves. Ned stepped forward before he could think, his sword drawn before he remembered. He no longer had an army, 3 of them, one of him. They laughed until the first one's throat split open like overripe fruit. Ned moved like a shadow, silent and brutal. He didn't fight like a lord anymore. He fought like a man who'd lost everything. By the time it ended, 2 were dead, and the 3rd was choking on his own blood, begging for mercy. "Why?" Ned asked, pressing his foot to the man's chest. "Why betray the Starks?" The man coughed blood. The Boltons were promised the north. Roose is warden now. Ramsay holds Winterfell. That name, Ramsay, Ned hadn't heard it before. "Roose has a son." The man laughed through cracked teeth. "A bastard. Bastard in every way. But Lord Bolton gave him Winterfell. After Theon Greyjoy burned it, burned your home, burned your boys." Ned stepped back, his heart stuttering. "Bran," he whispered. "Rickon." The man shrugged. "Gone. No one's seen them. Burnt, they say. Just bones left behind." That night, under the cold sky of the north, Ned Stark wept like he hadn't since he was a child. His wife was dead. His son was butchered. His home was gone, and now even his youngest son swallowed by fire and lies. He had hidden in the shadows long enough. The war wasn't over, not truly. Not while Rose Bolton sat in his chair, not while Tywin Lannister toasted the slaughter of wolves, not while the North bent the knee to cowards and oathbreakers. He would not raise a banner. He would not call for lords. He would become something else entirely, a ghost, a blade in the night. And he would begin with the bastard who sat on his throne. Winterfell, the word cut like a sword. He would go back, even if it was the last thing he ever did. The north had changed. Gone were the warm fires in every hearth, the snow-covered fields echoing with laughter, and the steady rhythm of Stark bannermen riding beneath the direwolf. Instead, the air around Winterfell now smelled like damp stone and blood. The flayed man of House Bolton hung above the gate like an open wound. Ned Stark stood at the edge of the woods, cloaked in grey, snow drifting around him like ash. Winterfell rose in the distance, familiar yet broken. Its towers had been rebuilt in haste, uneven and scarred. Smoke rose from its chimneys, but no song came from the yard. No children played near the stables. It was a castle held by fear, not honor. He watched the gate shift open just before dusk. A rider entered, mud caked on his boots, dragging 2 shackled villagers behind him. Ned didn't need to get closer to see who it was. The bastard, Ramsay Snow they called him, son of Roose, cruelty made flesh. The bastard wore black leathers dyed red at the edges, not from decoration, but from blood. Ned had heard enough. Stories on the road. Ramsay hunted small folk for sport, flayed entire families for minor disobedience, and burned every raven that did not carry a Bolton message. The North bent not because they loved the Boltons, but because they feared them. That fear was about to end. Ned found shelter in the ruins of a forgotten watchtower 2 miles south of the castle. For 3 nights he watched. He counted the guards, noted the patrol patterns, and learned the weaknesses of the gate. He had no army, no banners, but he did not need them. All he needed was a plan. On the 4th night, a storm rolled in. Snow blanketed the roads, blinding and bitter. That was the moment he'd been waiting for. Under cover of the blizzard, he crept toward Winterfell, using the hidden tunnel near the first keep, one only a Stark would know. It had been used by boys sneaking out, and by him long ago, when he was young and bold. Inside, the castle was cold, not from winter, but from the absence of soul. The walls bore no Stark banners. The crypts were sealed. Even the godswood had been desecrated, the heart tree hacked at, its red sap dried like old wounds. He moved like a shadow, silent, through the empty halls. The Boltons were careless, comfortable in their stolen home. Guards dozed by hearths, or drank themselves stupid. No one noticed the man with northern eyes, slipping past them like death itself. He found Ramsay in the great hall, alone, drunk, feasting on rabbit while a servant girl trembled at his feet. Her face was bruised, her eyes red with fear. Ramsay was laughing, speaking to her as if she were a hound, not a person. Ned stepped into the firelight without a word. The girl's eyes widened, and Ramsay looked up, confused. "Who in the bloody—" He never finished the sentence. Ned moved fast, faster than a man his age should. The dagger in his hand sank into Ramsay's shoulder, and before the bastard could scream, Ned's other hand smashed his face against the table. Bones cracked, blood spilled across the roast. They struggled, but Ramsay was more bark than bite. He fought dirty, scratching, kicking, but Ned had fought in 2 wars and bled in 3 kingdoms. He twisted Ramsay's arm until it snapped, then drove his blade into the boy's gut. Ramsay gasped, eyes wide. "You don't belong here," Ned whispered. "This is my home." He left the dagger buried to the hilt. The servant girl ran. More would come. There'd be questions, but it didn't matter. Winterfell was no longer in the hands of a monster. He dragged Ramsay's body out to the yard and tied it to the gate. Let the North see it, let them remember. And as the sun rose the next morning, casting long shadows over the snow-covered courtyard, Ned Stark stood atop the walls of his ancestral home. Not as a lord, not as a ghost, but as the man who had returned. He was done hiding, and the world would burn before he let it fall again. Word travels fast in the north, faster still when it carries blood. By the time the sun reached its highest point over Winterfell, every village within 50 leagues knew one thing: Ramsay Bolton was dead, and someone had nailed his body to the gates of the castle. Some called it justice, others called it madness, but most, especially those who had lived under Ramsay's rule, called it hope. In the great hall of Winterfell, Ned Stark sat at the head table alone, just as his ancestors once had. He bore no crown. He made no declarations. The castle itself seemed to breathe again, as if it recognized its true master. The servants, too frightened at first to speak, now moved quietly through the halls, whispering to each other, stealing glances. A few of them had recognized him. One knelt at his feet and wept. Another simply said, "The gods are good." Before, rushing to the kitchens, he didn't ask for loyalty, but it came. By nightfall, farmers and small folk began arriving outside the gates. Some brought food, others brought news, a few brought weapons, rusted swords, hunting bows, axes once used for woodcutting. No lords, no banners, just people, northerners. They had not forgotten the name Stark, but Winterfell would not hold long. Ned knew this. Rose Bolton would ride once he learned of his bastard's death. And the Lannisters? If they found out Ned was alive, they'd send more than just gold. They'd send fire and steel. So he prepared. He spoke with the blacksmith, the stable master, the old kennel keeper who'd somehow survived the Greyjoy sack. Every man and woman still breathing in Winterfell had a role. Walls were reinforced, arrows fletched, food rationed. The ravens, long silenced under Bolton rule, flew again, not with calls for war, but for the truth, to the Vale, to the Riverlands, to Bear Island and Deepwood Motte. Ned Stark lives, and the North will rise again, but not all messages flew in ink. A rider arrived from the south on the 5th day, bloodied, frostbitten, near death. His name was Carl, a former sworn sword, of House Dustin. He'd ridden from Baratheon after hearing rumors that the Starks had returned. "Rose knows," he croaked, collapsing in the yard. "He's coming. 300 men, 2 days behind me." Ned didn't flinch. "Is he bringing fries?" he asked. Carl nodded. "Aye, and worse, carrion men, hired blades, the kind that slit throats in the dark." "Good," Ned said, standing. "Let them come." When the attack came, it came swift and brutal. The Bolton Frey force descended on Winterfell under the cover of darkness, hoping to breach the gates and slaughter what they thought was a skeleton garrison. They found a fortress awake, torches lit the walls, archers stood ready, and on the battlements, under a sky smeared with snow and smoke, stood Eddard Stark, cloaked in grey, Longclaw strapped to his back. A gift Jon had left him once, meant to be passed down, but never returned. "Open the gates," he said. His men hesitated. "Open them!" And they did. Rose Bolton rode through the mist, flanked by Frey cousins and 24 sellswords in mismatched armor. He dismounted with slow precision, pulling off his gloves like a man about to deliver a sermon. "I thought you dead," Rose said flatly. "You helped try to make it true," Ned answered. "You should have stayed buried." Rose stepped forward, drawing his sword. Ned unsheathed his own. The courtyard erupted, steel clashed with steel, arrows sang from the walls, flames licked the sky as Frey tents caught fire. Ned moved through the chaos like the old wolf he was, not graceful, but relentless. He cut down 2 sellswords with practiced ease, blocked a thrust from a Frey knight, then drove his blade into the man's throat without a second glance. And then he found Rose. The Lord of the Dreadfort fought like a snake, precise, deadly, full of poison. But Ned was stronger, angrier, filled with a grief that had turned cold and sharp. They circled each other, snow falling around them. "You abandoned the Starks," Ned said. "You killed your own king." "I chose the winning side," Rose hissed. "Then you chose wrong." Their swords clashed once, twice, sparks flew. Rose's blade sliced across Ned's shoulder, but the old wolf didn't slow. He pressed forward, every strike fueled by the names of the dead. Robb, Catelyn, Bran, Rickon. Rose faltered, and Ned drove his blade through the man's gut, then twisted. It was over. The rest of the Bolton force scattered. The Freys fled, and Winterfell stood. For the first time in years, the North was free of the flayed man. But Ned Stark didn't celebrate. He stood in the yard as snow fell, covered in blood, his sword heavy in his hand. Because the war wasn't over, not while Lannisters still wore. Crowns. The North had bled, it had burned, it had buried its kings and choked down its sorrow for far too long. But with Rose Bolton dead and Winterfell reclaimed, the cold winds carried a new sound, not of mourning, but of awakening. The North remembered. Ravens flew again, but this time they carried no fear. Their messages bore a single truth: Lord Eddard Stark lives. The wolves have returned. From the western mountains, House Glover rode with 200 spears. From Bear Island came word from Lady Major's daughters. The Starks are our true liege. The bastard who flayed children is no king to us. And from the Vale, a reply came late. but with it rode Sir Lyn Corbray himself, bearing a sealed message and a smaller truth tucked. Behind his breastplate, Sansa Stark is alive and still in the clutches of the Lannisters. That news struck deeper than any sword. Eddard sat long that night in the godswood of Winterfell. The weirwood tree stood silent, its bleeding face scarred but unbowed. Beneath it he knelt, hands trembling, not from age, but from the weight of all he had lost and all he had yet to save. Sansa. He had come back from death itself for her and Arya. Robb was gone. Catelyn too. But if even one of his daughters still lived, then there could be no rest. Not for him. Not yet. And now he knew where she was. Not the Red Keep anymore. Not exactly. Word had reached him that she'd been wed, to Tyrion Lannister of all people, and then vanished after Joffrey's death. Some claimed she poisoned him. Others said the imp killed the boy king. Ned knew the truth likely lay somewhere in the middle. He also knew that if the Lannisters didn't have her now, someone else did. He couldn't risk another mistake, so he gathered the lords who'd returned, Glovers, Manderleys, Umbers, not as king but as father, and he told them his plan. "I do not want war," he said, "but I will not let my children be hunted like animals. If you ride with me, it will be to end the rule of lions, not to take a crown." The hall was quiet until Lord Glover stood. "You want justice, Lord Stark," he said. "So do we." That was enough. They left Winterfell before the thaw, before the passes became too soft with melted snow. They rode south through the King's Road, smaller than a proper army, but too large to be ignored. 500 strong, every man and woman swearing the old oaths again. At Moat Cailin they met resistance. Ironborn remnants still clung to the ruined fort, thinking the North too broken to reclaim it. They were wrong. Ned sent the Glover archers forward at night. By morning the Ironborn were either dead or bound, and the causeway was clear. He was not Robb. He didn't need the Riverlords, not yet. His march would be fast, direct, a strike, not a siege. And with every village passed, every farm visited, more men joined. Not knights in shining armor, but blacksmiths and huntsmen. Boys who had once played in the snow beneath Winterfell's walls, now grown and bearing grief in their hearts. At the Twins, they left no survivors. The Freys had expected another Stark lamb. Instead, they received a wolf with a vengeance. By the time they reached the Trident, word had spread across the Seven Kingdoms. Ned Stark lives. He marches on King's Landing. Inside the capital, the court was in chaos. Tommen now sat on the Iron Throne, a child cloaked in Lannister colours. Cersei ruled behind his name, but even she felt the shadow of winter creeping toward her. She summoned Jaime, ordered. The gates reinforced, called for the banners of the Westerlands. And when word came that Stannis Baratheon had taken Dragonstone and was now burning his way toward King's Landing from the east, her mask of power began to crack. 2 wolves and a stag, and no friends left. In the northern camp, outside the fields of Harrenhal, Ned prepared to ride again. Scouts had returned with word. Sansa had last been seen fleeing the Vale under the protection of Peter Baelish. Of all the men he hated in Westeros, Baelish's name was carved deepest into his bones. He would take King's Landing not for glory, not for revenge, but for her, for his daughter. And if Baelish had laid a finger on her, not even the gods would find a piece of him left to bury. The banners of the north reached the edges of King's Landing, just as the first fires began inside the city. Stannis Baratheon had already struck from the eastern coast, surrounding the harbour with his fleet and setting the Red Keep on edge. The gates to the capital were sealed, the gold cloaks spread thin, and every Lannister ally began to look at the throne with uncertainty instead of loyalty. But it wasn't Stannis the people feared the most. It was the rumour, Ned Stark lives. Some said it was a trick, a ghost in wolf's skin. Others swore they saw him at Harrenhal, his face older, harder, but eyes still carved from winter. The city braced for war. Not a siege, not a clean clash of kings, but reckoning, something older, something colder. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei paced like a cornered lioness. Her son, Tommen, cried each night from the fear in his mother's voice. Her barked orders to prepare wildfire, to summon loyal men, to silence whispers. But nothing could silence what was coming. Ned Stark did not announce his arrival. He didn't need to. While Stannis' ships blockaded the Blackwater Bay, Ned's force moved inland, striking quietly, cutting through Lannister supply lines, liberating villages, and spreading one simple message: "This is not your king." Then came the ravens from the Vale. Sansa was with Petyr Baelish. The letter bore her hand, but the words were cold, distant, forced. "He says we are safe, father. He says the Vale owes no blood debt." Ned crushed the message in his hand. He knew Littlefinger, knew the poison under that honeyed tongue. He had once trusted him, and that mistake had nearly cost him everything. But not again. He would save his daughter, even if it meant breaking the gates of the Eyrie stone by stone. But first, the Iron Throne. By nightfall, a breach opened. Not from the walls, not from the sea, from inside. Men once loyal to Tywin, men who remembered Casterly Rock's arrogance, opened the mud gate to northern riders disguised as merchants. 20 Stark men slipped in and seized control of the stables and the lower market. They didn't burn, they didn't pillage. They only hoisted the banner of the direwolf and said one thing: "The true hand of the king has returned." By dawn, the streets echoed with their cry. Tommen was rushed into hiding. Cersei stood in the great hall with Jaime at her side, both cloaked in red, their golden armor glinting beneath the painted glass. When the doors burst open, silence fell, and Eddard Stark stepped into the hall. Not as a ghost, not as a whisper, but as a man with fire in his chest and snow in his stare. He wore no crown, only a black cloak over old leathers. His beard was streaked with grey. His sword hung low and heavy. Behind him came Sir Wyman Manderley, Lord Glover, and 2 knights of the Vale who'd pledged to him after hearing of Baelish's betrayal. "Ned Stark," Cersei hissed, "you were executed for treason." "I was silenced for truth," Ned said, "and now I will speak it again." Jaime stepped forward, sword in hand. "You've spilled enough blood," he said, voice tired. "The boy is king now. Go back north, Stark." Ned's eyes never left Cersei. He was never Robert's. "Son, you know that. So did Jon Arryn. So did I." Jaime flinched. Cersei's face twitched. "You're not here for justice," she spat. "You want revenge." "I already had it," Ned replied. "Rose, Ramsay, Walder, they've all answered for what they've done, but you—" He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You made my daughter a prisoner. You watched my son die. You burned the north. You are not a queen. You are a tyrant with a crown made of lies." She reached for a dagger. He moved faster. It wasn't Longclaw that cut her. It was the shorter blade he carried at his side, the same one used to execute traitors back in Winterfell. With one clean stroke, he opened her palm, the dagger clattering to the floor. "No more?" he said quietly. Jaime stepped back. For once, the Kingslayer had no words. Tommen was found hiding in the sept, sobbing into a carved lion toy. Ned didn't kill the boy. He wasn't a Lannister by choice. He gave him over to the Maesters, stripping him of the crown, naming him Ward of the North until another decision could be made. There would be no more Baratheon kings, no more lions on the throne. He did not take the Iron Throne for himself. He set no Stark upon it. Instead, he held council. He called the surviving lords of each realm, old and new, broken and bruised, and he asked them what they wanted. Some called for Daenerys, some whispered of Gendry, but Ned only listened, and in the end he did what he had always done. What was right, not easy. He returned to the north. With Sansa at his side, Rescued from the clutches of Baelish, who died with a knife in his throat and tears in his eyes, he rode through the gates of Winterfell once more. No longer Lord Eddard Stark, not king in the north, just a father, just a man who had once been broken and chose to rise because winter had come and the wolf endured.